The East Tower window faced the research yard, and for 7 weeks I had told myself I stood there because the light was good for reading dispatches. The dispatches were rarely in my hands. Ressa was in the yard. She arrived in the 3rd week of autumn with a letter of commission from the Pack Guild and a worn leather satchel that listed slightly to the left, as if it had always been overfull and she had simply made peace with the tilt. My steward, Bran, processed her arrival the way he processed everything routine, efficiently, and without particular attention. A bond reader, he noted in the holds registry, hired to study the connection patterns of the eastern packwolves. Useful work, not court work. He assigned her the research yard below the East Tower, a low-walled stone enclosure where the pack's younger wolves took their morning runs. He did not introduce her to me. There was no reason to. The court hired specialists for the pack wolves regularly, healers, trainers, bloodline readers, and I met none of them, unless a problem reached my table. Bran saw no problem here. Neither did I. For 3 weeks, I did not know her name. I knew the sound of her, which I told myself was a different thing entirely. The soft commentary she kept up with the wolves in the yard. Not commands, not the sharp correction of a trainer, but a running, quiet accounting of what she observed. "You are favoring that left foreleg again, Cass." "I know, I am noting it." The way the pack wolves, animals that had been skittish with strangers all autumn, settled around her like water finding level. The way she arrived each morning before the light had finished arriving, and stayed until Bran sent a boy with her supper. What I did not tell myself, what I was careful not to look at directly, was this. Fen stirred on those mornings. Fen was my wolf, and for 3 years he had been silent. The wound came from a border raid in the 2nd year of my rule. A blade meant for a different target, a badly timed step in the dark, and something in the bond between a wolf and its king, something that is not the body, not quite the mind, but lives in the space between them, had fractured. He did not die. He was simply quiet, there, but unreachable, the way a word you know perfectly well goes blank when you need it most. The pack healers told me this could happen. They told me some wolves came back. They told me, with the careful gentleness of people delivering permanent news, that some did not. I ruled Valdenmoor without him. You learn to. The decisions you once made with the whole of yourself, with the deep, certain pull that a healthy wolf gives its king, you begin to make with will alone. It is a thinner tool. It works. I did not allow myself to mourn it in any way that showed. And then a woman arrived in the research yard below my window with a left-listing satchel, and on the 4th morning of her work, I stood at the East Tower glass and felt Fen move. Not much. Not the surge of a wolf who has found his footing. Only a faint, interior shift. The way a room changes when someone you did not hear, enter, is suddenly simply there. I stepped back from the window. I looked at the dispatch in my hand. I told myself the cold morning air was the cause. By the 5th week, I had stopped pretending I did not know her name. Bran had mentioned it in passing. I had filed it without comment, and retrieved it more than once in the quiet hours of the evening, without being entirely certain why. Ressa. She had published 3 papers on wolf bond formation for the guild, Bran mentioned, when I asked. Not urgently, only as a matter of thoroughness. Her methods were precise. Her observations, the guild rated among the most careful in a generation. She was also, Bran did not mention because it was not the sort of thing he tracked, the first person in 3 years in whose presence Fen did not simply lie still. I knew because I watched. From the window, yes, but twice from the east yard door, which I could reach without being seen, and once from the corner of the great lower corridor when she crossed it briefly to retrieve a record from the pack healer's room. She did not see me. Fen felt her at 20 paces, the way a compass needle feels north. Not dramatically, not with any visible drama, only the quiet turning of something that had been still. I did not act on this. I want to be clear about that. I watched it happen for 7 weeks, and chose each morning to wait 1 more day before deciding what it meant. Valdenmoor had enough demands on my attention. I told myself that what was happening in the East Yard was fragile, and that drawing her into court attention before I understood it would be the kind of thing that breaks fragile things. I told myself I was being careful. What I was being, in truth, was afraid. Not of the bond, of what it meant that 7 weeks of her simply existing below my window had done what 3 years of healers and hope had not. Lord Cavan of Fenmere arrived on the first hard frost of winter with a delegation of 12 and a commission to renegotiate the southern timber rights. I had been expecting him. He was a practical man, unhurried, and his visits were almost always productive. I had no grievance with him. He took his place at my table that first morning, with the ease of a man who is comfortable in other men's halls, and we worked through the first round of the timber numbers without difficulty. It was the second afternoon that he found the research yard. He had been walking the hold's lower grounds with Bran, the way visiting lords do when they want to understand the measure of a place, and he came upon Rhaesa at her work, with a young wolf named Cassa stretched at her feet, his narrow gray head resting across her ankle, with the absolute trust of an animal who has decided there is nowhere else to be. Cavan, to his credit, did not startle the wolf. He stopped at the yard's stone entrance and watched her work with the expression of a man who has recognized an unexpected quality in something he had not thought to examine. Bran told me this that evening. He told me also that Cavan had spoken with her for nearly an hour, that he was clearly impressed with the guild methods she used, that Fenmere had no bond reader of her caliber on its own staff. Something in my chest did not like this information. I sat with the sensation for a moment, named it nothing, and told Bran to set a place for her at the far end of the great hall table the following morning. He looked at me with the quiet surprise of a man who has served a king long enough to recognize when something has changed, and said nothing at all. She arrived the next morning in a gray dress and a look of mild uncertainty, because no one had told her why she had been moved from the yard, only that the king's table was the expectation today. She took her seat at the far end, with the composure of a woman who has spent enough years being the least important person in any room that she knows exactly how to occupy a space without drawing attention to herself. I found I could not stop being aware of exactly where she was. Cavan arrived at the table shortly after, and found her at the end of it, with the pleased expression of a man who had been hoping for this, and chosen not to say so. He took the seat beside her. He spoke to her with the ease of their afternoon together, already established between them. I watched from the head of the table, and continued talking about timber rights, because there was nothing to say, and no standing to say it, and Fen lay quiet in me, and I was only a man watching a visiting lord speak to the hold's researcher, which was entirely unremarkable. Fen was not quiet. He was building, low, the way a fire builds behind a door, no flame visible, only the heat beginning to press through the wood. I had not felt that in 3 years, and I had forgotten what it felt like to have something pushing from inside. I kept my hands flat on the table. I watched Cavan lean toward her to point at something in the papers she had brought, and I watched her tilt her head to look, and the heat behind the door went from warm to something close to its opposite, a cold, very clear alertness that was also the oldest thing I know. At the end of the meal, Cavan rose and drew her away from the table toward the corridor to continue whatever conversation they had been having. I heard him, from where I sat, offer her the position of head bond reader in Fenmere's northern hold. I heard him tell her it was the largest wolf population in the Southern Alliance. I heard him say it with warmth, with the kind of straightforward respect that deserved a genuine answer. And then I heard him reach for her hand to underscore the offer, a courtly gesture, nothing more, and take it in both of his. Fen came back. Not gently. Not the gradual return of something that has been absent and is finding its way. All at once, like a door blown open, a pressure, then a roar of presence, then the whole of him simply there, as he had been before the raid, as he had been in the years when I knew without thinking what I was and what I was for. 3 years of silence, and then none. The mate mark came up on my wrists, not the pale, tentative glow that the healers sometimes see in uncertain bonds, the full mark, both wrists, blazing so bright in the cold corridor air that the nearest court members stepped back. Rhaesa turned at the light. Cavan turned. The corridor went entirely still. I stood up from the table. I crossed the room with the unhurried certainty of a man who has finally decided, and I positioned myself between Rhaesa and Lord Cavan of Fenmere, and I looked at the mark on my wrists, and I looked at the mark rising on hers, because it was there, pale gold and undeniable, on both her wrists too, and she was looking at it with the expression of a woman who has just understood something she had been measuring from the wrong angle for 7 weeks. "Cavan," I said, "thank you for the offer. She will remain at Valdenmoor. He looked at the marks. He looked at her face. He was a practical man. He released her hand with the quiet dignity of someone who has just realized the room has changed, and chooses to change with it gracefully. "Of course," he said, with a nod that meant it. "My congratulations." Then he stepped back, and I turned to her. Ressa was watching me with a stillness that was not shock. It was the stillness of a careful observer who has gathered all available information and is deciding what it means. On her wrists, the mate mark was still rising, the gold deepening, as Fen pressed toward her, as fully himself as I had ever felt him, with none of the hesitation of a wolf who has been absent for 3 years. He did not seem to remember that he had been absent. He seemed to feel only that he was where he was supposed to be. 7 weeks, she said quietly. Not a question. She was doing the accounting, the way she did with the wolves, noting it, placing it in order. 7 weeks, I agreed. You listened from the East Tower window. I did not pretend otherwise. Every morning. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something closer to the expression of a woman who has just found the reading she had been unable to locate, and is allowing herself, briefly, the satisfaction of it. Cass trusted you, she said. He does not usually trust people he cannot see. I had not known she had noticed. She held out her hand, not performed, not tentative. A decision, plain and given freely, the way she gave everything, with the quiet precision of someone who has looked at the facts and found them sufficient. I took it, and Fen, who had been silent for 3 years, exhaled. I named her before the assembled court that afternoon. Ressa, bond reader of Valdenmoor, and its Luna, and mine. And the court stood without being asked. Caven nodded from his place, with something that looked, I thought, like sincere relief for both of us. Bran updated the hold registry in his careful hand and said nothing, which was how I knew he was pleased. That evening she moved her worn, left-listing satchel from the research yard to the east wing, and I helped her carry it, and neither of us mentioned that it was always overfull. She set it on the table near the window that faced the yard. It was the mornings, she said, not looking at me, looking at the wolf run below, in the last of the winter light, where Fen paced the perimeter with the unhurried ease of a wolf who has been away a long time and is learning the ground again. I noticed something was different in the yard on certain mornings. The wolves settled faster, the bond readings ran quieter. I thought it was the weather. And now? She turned from the window with that same precise, unhurried look. Now I have a better hypothesis, she said. Fen came back in from the yard. He lay down across the threshold of the room, his great gray side rising and falling in the cold evening air, and he did not look like a wolf who intended to move. I had ruled Valdenmoor without him for 3 years. I had been careful and correct and entirely alone in the way that only becomes visible when it ends. She pulled her notes from the tilting satchel and set them on the table and began to work, and Fen closed his eyes, and the room was the kind of room it had not been in a very long time. Full, in the way that has nothing to do with how many people are in it.